The original Insurgency came out on the 22nd of January 2014 after a lot of testing and pre-release versions. It was made on the Source engine, and it was within that boom of games that came from mods into full-fledged title, and Insurgency was no different. You would take to the streets for intense close-quarter combat, where a team's survival depends upon securing crucial strongholds and destroying enemy supplies in this multiplayer and co-op Source engine-based experience. And intense close-quarters combat is perhaps the best way I've heard to describe this title. You see, Insurgency did something a little bit different. In a time where we were full up of Battlefield and Call of Duty, we were calling for a bit more of a realistic and, well, terrifying is probably the best way I could put it. The game was incredibly successful. It blew up massively, and because of its Source engine basis, it was so accessible to a much wider audience. However, Insurgency Sandstorm has been out for quite some time now. It is kind of taken over the name of Insurgency. The player base is almost all entirely drifted over to that title because, well, it's the modern version of an all-time classic. But how does Insurgency hold up? That 2014 title that took the gaming world by storm. Is it still worth playing today? First of all, while Sandstorm is out and it was really widely well received, it never quite reached the same heights that the first Insurgency did. I mean, Sandstorm's all-time player count, current player count on Steam, was about 15,000 players, whilst the first Insurgency reached 120,000 concurrent players at its height. Why is this, however? Is this because it's a much better game? I wouldn't necessarily say so, but it was back in 2014, and using the Source engine means it is way more accessible to a much wider audience. The move to Unreal 4 for New World when they made Insurgency Sandstorm, to move away from the limitations of Source, to make it graphically way more beautiful, to help with the immersion. However, it meant that not all the people that were big fans of Insurgency could move over and migrate to the new game, because it was much harder to run. Optimization, at least on launch for Sandstorm, wasn't exactly ideal. The first Insurgency back then, and still can, run on any PC. Now, I loaded up Insurgency the other day, just to see how it was going. It was the first time I'd actually loaded it up in years, and when I say years, I mean really since Sandstorm came out, back in 2018. Really? Was Sandstorm that long ago? The customization for the first Insurgency was fine, it was never fantastic, but it was mostly just cosmetic, because when you went into the games, you could then buy and use your points for getting different weapons and loadouts. However, in terms of multiplayer servers, there were some. The game is a little bit dead, as you'd probably expect, but it wasn't completely empty. About 500 current players at the time that I was playing, which was about 10 AM in the UK, which isn't exactly the peak of everybody getting online. It was more than enough to get some games. There were about 2 or 3 full servers with a scattering across the others, mostly based around multiplayer competitive person versus person. There was nothing really on the cooperative side, which is a bit of a shame since I think that's one of Insurgency's strongest assets. However, it wasn't 100% dead. Yet of course it is clear to see the majority of the player base has migrated over, with about 5,000 concurrent players on Sandstorm as we speak. Graphically, it holds up. Okay, it's a little bit strained and you can see some issues every now and then, but every Source game looked like this, and it's not exactly a detriment to the title. As I've said, it makes it so much more accessible, and the fact that it looks good enough is all it really needs to do. Insurgency isn't specifically about how graphically amazing it looks, but the immersion you feel with these close quarters fighting, whether it's against AI or real players. So the graphics still look fine for what it is. In terms of AI, it can be a bit brutal. In both ways. The AI can either be fantastic and one-shot you from across the map, get that perfect sniper spot, or flank round to the position that you didn't quite expect them to be in, or they can stand next to you and not really understand what's going on and have no idea that you're there. It meant for some beautiful moments where you're able to walk into a room, spray down 5-6 enemies at once, and it meant for some incredibly infuriating moments where you get shot through a wall, which didn't tend to happen when you played against real players. AI was always kind of an issue, but I think it was better than most games at the time. Most multiplayer titles that added in AI would just run for you in single file lines, get mowed down time after time. And there was a bit of that in the original Insurgency, don't get me wrong. But in cooperative modes, especially the hardcore versions, there was actually some real tactics going on there with the AI. Some of my favourite multiplayer experiences in gaming were within Insurgency, loading up with a group of friends, whether it's co-op or against other players, and holding positions, working together, and that's a gameplay style that Insurgency really tried to champion. In a time where squad didn't exist yet, Arma 3 was recently out, and Hell Let Loose was just a thought in a fetus's eye. Insurgency was one of the first to make real communication in a simulator-based game specifically paramount to the success of your team. Arma had always championed it from the early 2000s, with Arma 2 mostly being the inspiration for the newest Insurgency. Of course, Insurgency took what Arma 2 did, narrowed it down and focused it on more team-based and smaller maps, but the inspiration is still there. But it's not exactly about what this game is. It's about what this game led to. Bringing in such a big player base that led New World Interactive the ability to create something bigger and better, to move on to Unreal Engine 4 and increase the scope and vision that they had in the first place. Insurgency Sandstorm is one of my favourite games and most played games on the whole, and it all led from this first Insurgency. Sandstorm is brilliant, graphically, sound-wise, immersion-wise, but it all came from these core mechanics and the beauty that was this 2014 iteration in the franchise. Whether it is the dodgy AI that was improved to Sandstorm, whether it is the close quarters combat that sometimes glitched out when you were trying to look down the sights that was then improved onto Sandstorm, it all came from this specific place, and for that reason this will always hold a really important place in my heart when it comes to first-person shooters. It was so unique, having such a fast time to kill. The devs trusted players to be able to adapt and cope to this new gameplay style that such arcadey shooters like Battlefield and Call of Duty never really took the risk to do. And it worked. It really worked. It built up this fan base of more hardcore FPS players, and I think that will always be there. It inspired other games like Hell Let Loose, Squad in the future, when they saw that people wanted this fast time to kill, more realistic FPS style, and we got some of my favourite games. I mean, Hell Let Loose is perhaps my favourite game of all time. That probably wouldn't exist without this first Insurgency and its later sequel, Day of Infamy, the World War II version in 2017. But should you buy this game? Should you go and buy the first Insurgency? Look, it's pretty cheap. It deserves to be because it's been out for such a long time now. There are still a lot of players on, and if you like playing against bots and smaller games, you'll probably enjoy this. But I think Sandstorm is a better game in general. I think it improved upon everything that the first Insurgency had. It is one of the best examples of a developer taking an idea, but looking at its limitations, putting it on a new engine and trying to solve those things. So I still think if you're looking to get into Insurgency, Sandstorm is the way to go. However, if your PC isn't exactly great, if you're running on your mum's laptop or an old Dell Optiplex that probably couldn't run Sandstorm, the first Insurgency is a great place to get started. There are still people on there. You will still get that beautiful hardcore gameplay, and you'll still get those really well-designed close-quarter maps. So I still think this game will be here for quite some time.